Hello everyone, Mark here, and today we are doing the second entry to the 6 Principles of Training series, covering the 6 Principles of Training by Kondo Katsuki Sensei, English translation provided by Derek Steele. The excerpts used for these videos are found in the book right behind me, Daito-ryu Aiki Jujutsu Hiden Mokuroku Ikkajo, which unfortunately I believe is out of print. However, you will find a link to Kodio.com where you can find a free copy of the relevant excerpt from that book as a standalone article. The link is found in the description of the video here below. So without further ado, we're going to be covering today Metsuke, or eye contact. So I will do a first reading of the text found that's relevant to this entry today. After which I will be rewinding and I will be basically doing a sentence by sentence breakdown and adding some commentary and additional content, along with a few final words at the end to kind of wrap everything up. So without further ado, let's get started. Metsuke, eye contact. Metsuke refers to the use of the eyes. Essentially, there are two types of Metsuke training in Daito-ryu. One called Mukshin, literally the eye of the mind. The other called Ganniki, literally eye power. Mokushin involves seeing with the eye of the mind, often to enclose and envelop an opponent. Ganniki, on the other hand, is a sharp, penetrating gaze that sees an opponent's intention and can be used to dominate and control him. So that's the albeit relatively short text that's attached to Metsuke. Let's rewind, go back to the first sentence, and start to do a quick breakdown. Metsuke refers to the use of the eyes. Now, I tend to translate Metsuke to gaze more than eye contact, because eye contact really refers to kind of, really kind of having your eye contact with an opponent or another person, whereas I think Metsuke is more about how you actually leverage your gaze, basically, and where you put your what you put your gaze on, basically. What are you looking at any given point in time? With that said, and we're going to get into that in some of the other sentences, I think Metsuke goes a little bit beyond actual sight, and it's more about general perception and visualization than just basically what are you looking at and why, right? At the very least in Daito-ryu. Essentially, there are two types of Metsuke training in Daito-ryu, one called Mokushin, literally the eye of the mind, the other called Ganniki, literally eye power. Now, here I think the most important part of the sentence is actually not the description, which gets more elaborate in the other sentences anyway. It's that there are two types of Metsuke training in Daito-ryu. So let's break that down. Two types of Metsuke. There are more than two types. If you go in other traditions, I know that there's some traditions that will be a little bit more straightforward in terms of where, in general, you're going to be putting your gaze. Others are going to be a little bit more elaborate, right? But in Daito-ryu, generally, there's going to be two forms. And we're talking about Metsuke training, not just about where you're putting your gaze in a practical situation, but also how you should actually focus your gaze and sense of and perception in a training concept, so to basically, foster the development of certain abilities, or character traits. So overall, we're talking about things that are more specific to Daito-ryu here, not just like general concepts necessarily. And those are concepts that really make sense as part of Daito-ryu training. They don't necessarily mean that you should only use those two types of gaze in a combative situation or situation of aggression, conflict, altercation and whatnot. It's really, just, well, this is what is being done in Daito-ryu more than anything else, right? One is called Mokushin, the eye of the mind. The other one is called Ganniki, eye power. So, those are just basically pretty straightforward transliteration of the kanji's part of the words in Japanese. Literally, Ganniki is basically, sight power, I guess. And Mokushin is very much, eye of the heart, eye of the mind, basically, I guess could be translations, if we're speaking, no direct translation, perhaps a little bit decontextualized. That's basically what they're conveying. That's what the characters are conveying. Mokushin involves seeing with the eye of the mind, often to enclose and envelop an opponent. And this is where, I have a different interpretation here, which may or may be, correct. It may or may not be correct. It's not just about seeing physically, like, basically looking at something, but it's also about, and there's kind of a shade of, there's a shade here, right? Where it's, it's basically direct sight and indirect sight and visualization through other sensorial means to, extrapolation, essentially, right? So, there is what you're seeing with your eyes at any given point in time, and making sure that through your vision, you perceive as much as possible. But then there's also, well, you have reflections, you have things around you, you might have a mirror in your training hall that you can use to see behind you. And it's basically, including that visual input as part of your, your overall perception. Then there is basically, somebody walking behind you and hearing them, and perhaps, feeling, if you're in a dojo, for instance, you might actually feel the ground shake a little bit whenever they take a step. It's perceiving all those little things here that are not visual, but can help you visualize the overall situation in which you find yourself, and so on and so forth, right? It goes, if you want to go further down in that direction, you're going to see that it's less and less about actual seeing, and it's about more overall perception, right? And that's what the Mokushin concept, I think, is meant to convey here. Ganniki, on the other hand, is a sharp, penetrating gaze that sees an opponent's intention and can be used to dominate and control him. Daito-ryu, in many ways, is about really kind of crushing your opponent, I think. And the idea here is that you basically, want to discourage any aggression towards you or your group, through your personal stance, and through, conveying a certain presence of mind with your eyes and your face, really. So it connects a little bit to Rei in some ways, because you still, in the context of Daito-ryu, you still want to do it in a way that is, powerful, but, you don't want to be offensive either, most of the time. But you do want to basically control your opponent. You want to keep control over your opponent, and at the same time, keep your mind clear so that you actually see what's going on and can react to it as quickly and as adequately as possible, right? And Ganniki is, very much, I think, kind of the dual concept of making sure that, you catch you catch what's going on in spirit. You catch what's going on in the air. You can read the situation correctly, but you can also basically, use your eye contact in a way to convince the opponent that perhaps, getting into a altercation situation is not the best choice. Overall, the idea behind Metsuke, I think, is, as described here, is probably more specific to Daito-ryu than generic amongst multiple classical martial arts or even modern martial arts. I think it's relatively unique. As far as hand-to-hand combat is concerned, I think it's really just one glimpse of the ways you can actually, use your power of perception, right? And there's different philosophies and approach to this. Daito-ryu happens to have this particular approach to how you use your gaze, right? It doesn't mean it's necessarily the right one every time. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is the only type of gaze that you should be using ever. Again, as mentioned before, they are training tools as far as Daito-ryu is concerned. And when it comes down to actual combative situation or situation of conflict, again, there might be cases where, just being, having such a strong presence through your gaze might actually kind of be misplaced in some situations. So it doesn't mean that's like a one size fits all. It's not like a tool that you're going to end up using everywhere and in every places, and it's going to work every time, right? It's just one type of tool that might actually work in some situations. So you have to be careful about how you would approach that concept in situations other than training, I think. That's it for today. In the next entry to the 6 principles of training, we're going to be covering Mai, or distancing and distance management. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them down in the comments below. Thank you for your time, and until next time.